So when you build n8n on top of a database, you have your companies, you have your contacts, you have your jobs, etc. And if I enrich a company, I only have to enrich it once.
Clay has become the go-to, and that branding game is just simply so strong that it carries the whole decision-making process. But what is it there that you have seen that others have not?
In Clay, every new table forgets everything done in the past. You can't query it. Like, you have to start over every time.
Obviously, you have this now figured out, right? But in order to figure out, you fucked up a few times. Tell me more about those mistakes.
So for a client I previously worked with, and then 6 months later, they came back and they were like, hey, we want to work with you again. The workflow is still running. We haven't touched it. It's still working. It's still giving us leads.
Hi everyone, and welcome to My First Signal, the only show where we invite seasoned go-to-market practitioners to discover the practical side of designing a signal-based go-to-market engine for the first time under 30 minutes. My name is Georgi, and I'm the CEO of Signalbase. Now let's get practical. Hi everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of My First Signal. Today, I have a very different episode prepared simply because of the fact that for the first time ever, we have someone who is not sitting in-house trying to design go-to-market engines. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to welcome warmly Laurens from GTM Sigma, who does not only do go-to-market work, but he's also one of the few lecturers within the GTM engineering school. So yeah, Laurens, thank you very much, man, for coming up and trying to share your wisdom with us today.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
Just to get the conversation off the ground, and this is the fan favorite, what is your biggest hot take for the go-to-market landscape today?
Ooh, I guess one of the hot takes is I still believe Clay to be the testing, prototyping tool, and then the production one. Whether or not it's going to change will sort of depends. Because I'm also now like moving a little bit into just trigger dev using Cloud Code to code really fast. But I guess that's from what I'm posting on LinkedIn, that seems to get the most both love and hate on those posts.
Yeah. Totally. It's also like very different. And I think for a little bit more context for the audience, right? I know Laurens for I think 2 or 3 years because I used to work in Antwerp. So that's where the connection got started, I feel like. And now you're using Signalbase too, which is freaking awesome. And what like in our first call, when you mentioned, hey, I'm actually not using Clay that much, I was super surprised. Do you mind telling the people or the revenue executives out there what is like the difference? Why is your preference so strong towards n8n? Because I feel like obviously Clay has become like the go-to, and that branding game is just simply so strong that it carries the whole decision-making process. But what is it there that you have seen that others have not?
Yeah, it's interesting too, because usually when I'm talking to someone and I'm like, hey, I built most of it in n8n, they assume I don't know Clay, which is funny because I initially started more or less as a Clay agency, like before Clay had their like first big funding round. So it's like somewhat of an early adopter of them. I remember like one of my first clients had a conversation with him. He was like, yeah, but Clay, never heard of it. A small company, are they going to stick around, etc. Which now is, if you're in go-to-market engineering and you don't know Clay, it's almost crazy. So initially it started because like some workflows, like for example, if you're doing like buyer mapping, like you want to get a certain buyer, in Clay there's like certain limitations, as in you can only have so many people in each cell. So if like, for example, you want an AI to look at all the contacts that are there and then grab the one that's like appropriate for your use case. In Clay, you're either stuck with 10 accounts in one cell and then giving all those 10 to the AI agent, or getting them all into a different table and then getting the AI to look at each like column in the row individually and then scoring them or whatever. But AI scoring it's never fully accurate, and then you'll get duplicates, etc. So there was a big one, like just certain use cases where I was like, there has to be a better way to do this, because like I want to give AI all my contexts and then let it figure out what the right one is. And then from there, and to, for example, like credits is both like a good thing and a bad thing, right? Like you can test very fast, you can test very easily, but it's also more expensive, which don't really love. And especially the fact that, so when you build n8n on top of a database, you have your database, you have your companies, you have your contacts, you have your jobs, etc. And if I enrich a company, I only have to enrich it once and it's there in my database. And then next time I enrich it in a different flow, I just check first, when was the last time this company was enriched? If it was enriched in the last like 7, 14, whatever, depends on the flow or the workflow, I can decide not to enrich it again, but just take the record I already have. In Clay, every new table forgets everything it's done in the past. You can't query it. You can't, like, you have to start over every time. And another thing is like they're putting out more recently to make it more of a system versus something you have to operate. But initially, I think one of the first things was maybe like, I think scheduled runs and webhooks, but like in n8n, I had a workflow was just running. And then, so for a client I previously worked with, and we stopped working together. And then 6 months later, they came back and were like, hey, we want to work with you again. The workflow is still running. We haven't touched it. It's still working. It's still giving us leads. And it's very hard to do in Clay.
Yeah, totally. I discovered that one too, especially since we started building on top of Clay with Signalbase. So I needed naturally to understand more about the product. So exactly what you were saying, hit the nail on the sorry, hit the nail on the head. And to get now a little bit more practical, right? And it's a very broad question, so feel free to mingle around and choose the direction that you want. But ideally, we want to hear how others approach building such signal-based engines, right? Most of the times it starts from your ICP and from that point onward, it gets so much more complex. So yeah, walk me around like your own playbook. How do you see designing such engines? They start from the team itself. Who would you promote or who would you include, etc., etc. So walk us over it.
Yeah, I feel like signals is very misunderstood very often. I see it as signals is like a broad term for basically everything that's happening in your social address, whether that's companies on your website, on your LinkedIn, getting funding, and basically everything a company does can be a signal. And I feel like a lot of people just jumped on intent as, oh, that's the only signals there are, and then building a full engine based on more generic signals. Oh, they posted a job, so we need to do outreach. The way I kind of approach this is I call it vectorizing problems. But the first thing I tend to do is I don't really care about your ICP because I don't know, I feel like it's an executive exercise very often where there's just a few people being like, that's our ICP. And that's because I talked to these 3 companies and like I like them. So that's our ICP now. I usually just start with the question of one, what's the problem you solve? And to the very, very first principles, because a lot of companies will give you some buzzword marketing sentence of we solve this crazy whatever. But to the first principles, like what is the problem you solve in what's the metric, what's the money, etc. And then from there, basically asking the question within a company, what are the data points that change how big the problem is? Like when is it less, when is it more, etc. And then from there, you build out signals. As in, for example, you're doing supply chain planning as a software, a question would be, or like a vector would be, the more complex the supply chain, the harder it is to do the planning. So that's a signal, right? If the supply chain gets more complex, that means it's more prime to reach out. Or a volatile market, like the ground materials you're building your product from are either like relatively stable or relatively volatile, and it kind of change over time. For example, I don't know, aluminium as a random example. If all of a sudden like something happens where like an aluminium all of a sudden is very volatile, you should reach out to every company that's using that as ground material. That's an amazing signal for supply chain planning. And that's how I think about building out signals. You should look for signals that are tied to your specific problem, not just website visit or whatever. And website visits, like those are all fine, stack them on top. But I feel there should be way more thinking through the problem you solve and the data points that are can serve as a proxy for the problem getting either worse or less of a problem.
Yeah, totally. This is something that also Frank mentioned. So how he built his own signal-based engine is having evergreen plays, and one of these few occasional driven or situational signals, even if you want to call it, that really disrupts the market, and you can try to capitalize on that one. I do remember in my past I did something like this, and it works super well. A very well-known player within the community business, because previously I had a community-based product, closed down. So therefore there was so much demand and the market was so hungry for, okay, but what next? So in that case, I do agree heavily, not only for teams to have proper outreach, because I feel like most of the time when we talk about go-to-market and signal-based go-to-market and whatnot, people refer to outreach, but there is so much more than that, even from a marketing point of view. So, because you can capitalize on it, yes, of course, with outreach, but also with thought leadership ads around this. So it can go layers and layers into it. Do you also happen to run some evergreen plays on top of this, or how does then the system looks like? Okay, this problem that you're trying to solve, you monitor for these situation-based signals, right? But then what next?
Yeah, it depends is like the easy answer, but it's like it depends on where the constraint is, I would say. As in, a lot of companies obviously start with, you have a saying of the bottleneck is often at the top of the bottle. So outbound is often the start. And the first question is just obviously factorizing the problem, talking to, ideally, I like to work with teams where the founder or the founding team or anybody on the high level team has a very deep understanding of the vertical that they're in. Because like then we can go really deep in signals because they know their buyer, etc. And yeah, I mean from there, so you build that out and you just constantly test the hypothesis of, we think we solve this problem and we think that if we get signal X, that means this thing, and because of this thing, like we should reach out, etc. And from there, it's prioritization, right? Like you'll either have enough accounts to reach out to and the reply rate is enough to where now you have a next problem, or you still have the same problem. I see it as you have your go-to-market, bunch of steps, and each step has a conversion, there's a time delay, and there's a volume going through. And then some of these steps might be the constraints, or that might not be an obvious constraint. Meaning, like if you have an account executive that can take 10 meetings a day and you're stuck at like 10 meetings, then we can increase outbound, but you'll never get more revenue compared to the 10 meetings the account executive can take. So then that's the problem we need to solve first before we go working on outbound again. So that's how I think through what problem to solve. And then from there, it's always, okay, what's the process at this step? And then how can we build the systems to either make it just faster, make it the volume, the throughput way higher, or make it better, which is, for example, for an account executive doing meetings, like maybe right now he has 30 minutes to do research. And maybe if he had 2 hours, he would do way more research and he would uncover way more, not just interesting, but high ROI stuff because he knows more about the company. He can disqualify faster, etc. So then like we build the systems that can do that.
Very solid stuff. And this also covers a question that normally would come up from all of the revenue leaders, which is, okay, we have now so many signals. How do we prioritize that? I think that answer on its own answered it. So very good stuff. What is then something that obviously you have this now figure out, right? But in order to figure out, you fucked up a few times. So tell me more about those mistakes of yours so others can learn more from it.
I mean, for me, it's so you have mistakes on just building out the company, right? Like I'm building out this, I don't know, I'm always hesitant calling it an agency because I feel like the stereotypical agency doesn't have the best rep. But I'm not sure if there's like obvious mistakes, because I'm a big fail forward kind of guy. As in you try something and it doesn't work, which is just you either learn or you succeed. And just across building out everything, you just learn more stuff. And what I'm building now versus what I'm building, I don't know, 3 to 6 months ago, like looks completely different. Right now we're also upgrading our offer to separate two things out, as in like we built the context OS or the brain of whatever from go-to-market, which is basically just every communication that happens with clients, every signal we capture, etc., just builds out markdown files on segments, on companies, on accounts, etc., builds out insights. And then we can use those insights to build out on the execution side, which is emails being sent, tasks being created, notes being created, accounts being enriched, etc. Which is like, I don't know, 3 months ago we weren't building that, which you could classify as a mistake.
Yeah.
But yeah, I
No,
see most
or
of
a
it as
learning.
learning. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. No, that's actually super cool. And because of the fact that so many teams so far also miss the critical communication and documentation in order to optimize the rest of their agents. And this puts me into a reminder that also you don't need to design system only for one team, but for the entire company, right? in order to source learnings on a continuous basis. So we can they ship all of these learnings towards the rest of the departments and the execution just simply goes up. All right, Laura, so you obviously also taught a few GTM engineers upon the fact that how they can approach building an n8n agent for the first time from the ground up. And something that stood out is having that deep research methodology in. And I guess this also goes quite nicely with what you mentioned for the AEs to have 2 hours of research rather than 30 minutes of research. So can you be like as actionable as possible?
So usually for me, like the starting base is usually one I've already talked to someone with like deep vertical knowledge, which usually founder or whatever. So I fully understand the market. I fully understand the problem. Because once you start talking to reps and other people and you start talking about what should this deep research return, etc., you'll also get a bunch of shit basically on this would be cool and this would also be cool. But like you really have to figure out what's useful, what's not useful to create to really focus on what's useful, basically, which is common sense, but not always like common practice. Yeah, and then how I usually set up deep research, there's usually multiple triggers there. It's either going to be there's a meeting today, so we run deep research whenever there's a meeting. There's either just pure like outbound response, or we're writing copy and we want to feed the copy agent the deep research, or there's just a button inside the CRM to where like you click it and a deep research agent runs. From there, there's this idea from, I think Cognition posted it first, of building agents in sequence versus in parallel. And you basically I always like, when I'm building AI agents, I'm always thinking through, okay, like how would a person think through this stuff? Because it's a brilliant 4-year-old, right? It doesn't have context. It doesn't really know anything, but it has a lot of capability. It can do a lot and it can understand a lot. So I usually start with, for example, the supply chain. I usually start with, okay, like what does the supply chain of this company look like? That's the first agent. It only has to do like one task, and that's basically what are the nodes in their supply chain? Where's manufacturing? Where's distribution? What are all the manufacturing plants building? Where are all the distribution channels going, etc.? And then the next one is, okay, how many like products, for example, do they have? And then the next one is, okay, what are those products made of? And then you build on top, and each agent gets information from the previous agent, and you then build out this full map of a company. And then from there, you have your output, which is your deep research one. One thing also to notice, is like when talking to people about like building agents, etc., very often, if you just go to someone and you ask them like, hey, I'm building this research agent, what should be able to get or do? You'll get answers through the lens of this is what I think is possible to get, which is not what you want. You want to get if you had unlimited time, what would you be getting information wise? Like you had a full day of researching one company because you're an SDR and nobody cares, and you can just spend one day per account. And that's why you want to reverse engineer, not what they think is possible.
100%. I do have fallen in that trap myself too. So, oh yeah, but what's possible? Definitely don't think about what's possible. Think
That's
where
my
you want to
job.
go. Yeah, yeah. Nah, that's awesome. Awesome tip. Okay. And then when it comes to deep research itself, what is entailing deep research? Because there are levels to it, right? What is deep research for you, and where and how far can teams go to?
There's multiple things. Like one, I think it's deep research is like to the depth to where more information doesn't add to the outcome of whatever you're using it for. So that can still be kind of shallow depending on the use case. When I'm working on these things and you get I don't know if this is possible, but this would be cool, etc. I'm usually just don't worry about what's possible. If you can find it online, I'll be able to get it. So the depth really like you can go as deep as you want. If you can find it online, there's a way to get it. It's just your job to figure it out and like to get it one in a reliable way, and then one in a way that's ideally not taking 30 minutes to get it. And then even if it's taking 30 minutes, like you can play around with, I don't know, there was like another tech company that did something with when a workflow initiated and the user it seemed very fast, But that's because they started doing this stuff when the user booted up the system instead of pressing the button. And then when the button pressed, the workflow was already running for 5 minutes. That's something I like think a little bit about as well. So for example, if it takes 30 minutes to research something, then maybe start researching it like at 2 a.m. when everybody's sleeping, like for companies that have a meeting, for companies that come on a website, etc. Just start enriching data like that in the background. But that's more like tactical stuff. But yeah, at the end of the day, like deep really just depends on, yeah, whatever data you need, you can find it. If you can find it, like AI can find it, you just have to get it. And then depth only really correlates with what's necessary for the job to be done.
Okay, because we're going actually to the end of the show, Laurens, really quickly, if you have to give one underrated advice towards the go-to-market engineers and go-to-market execs out there, what would it be and why?
Oof, underrated. To GTM engineers, I would say if you're stuck in Clay, at least explore n8n and maybe just even just do an API call to n8n for stuff like when you have to split out information or whatever, because it's way faster in n8n, and then just return it via the API call. For revenue leaders in general, it's hard to give just one piece of advice because it's the typical consulting one, right? Like where you always say it depends because there's so many variables. But I would say maybe one thing is create velocity around building AI stuff, because it's like AI is new and you'll build stuff and some of it won't work, some of it will work. And the only like real way to making sure you kind of win in whatever new landscape this is to just do more experiments than your competitor is doing until you get it right. And whatever you get right, just scale the hell out of it. That's how I think about like just run the experiment. And it's just, especially now, like building something in n8n, building it with cloud code, etc. It's so fast. So just run the experiment, test, and if it fails, if it doesn't, scale the hell out of it.
It goes nicely with what I've been previously mentioning within the episodes. That goes with whenever you want to test a system also, and this is the same mindset that I have towards building stuff like workflows, agents, whatever. First do it manually, and then once you know how you get it done, just scale the hell out of it. Thanks, Laurens, for sharing your mindset with us and all of the n8n things that you can check below. And if you guys like this episode and you want to actually see how we can build an n8n agent in real time, that will be a challenge for Laurens, but I'm here for it. Do let us know, and I'll get you guys in the next one.